Welcome to Launched. I'm Charlie Chapman, and today I'm excited to bring you the developer behind the popular iOS emulator app Delta and the third-party app store AltStore, Riley Testut. Riley, welcome to the show.
Hey, Charlie. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I think we talked about you coming on, 2 years ago or something like that?
Yeah, a while back. Who knows? It's just, yeah.
We've met a couple times. I think every time has been in California at WWDC.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, for anybody listening at home, this is the first recording, the first real episode I've done of this in over a year, other than the special episodes, the live episodes that I did last year. So yeah, we're gonna be rusty, but luckily we have a really interesting, unique story here to tell. So I think that'll make it easy to get through. But thank you for coming on. I'm excited to talk about the whirlwind experience you've had over the last, I guess, year and a half.
Yeah,
I mean it's a longer journey, but really the last year and a half has been kind of insane.
Yeah, perfect word. Just insane. Just so hectic, but in all the best ways. Can't really complain. Just a wild ride.
Yeah, and I was telling you right before we started recording, but you decided to make this an even more dramatic start for me because the day before we started recording, suddenly you're in the news. You're giving press releases for some dramatic goings on with your alt store, which we'll get into.
Just another Tuesday, Apple saying stuff about us.
Never a dull moment in alt store land.
No.
But before we get into AltStore and Delta and Hot Tub and all of the craziness of the last year, I want to give everyone, an idea of who you are. So the three questions I always ask everybody to kick off the show is, where are you from? Do you have a formal education related to what you do? And then let's just talk about the journey that sort of led ultimately up to Delta and all of this craziness.
Sure. Okay. Then I'll start with where I'm from. I was born in Dallas, Texas. And I lived there for a few years. But then when I was 5, my family moved to New Zealand. And so I actually grew up in Auckland, New Zealand. And that's, to me, where I think of my foundational childhood and where I learned so much of who I am, or got who I am today. And New Zealand's great. Everyone should check it out. I love it there. But then
it's on my very high list of places.
It's such an incredible place.
I want to visit.
So much of my philosophy, I think, on work and everything is from that culture. They're very great people, lovely people, but whatever. That's a sidetrack. So yeah, I grew up in New Zealand, moved back to America, and then I was in Texas all throughout high school, and then went to California for college at University of Southern California. And that's where I studied computer science. And so I did study computer science. I graduated with just a CS degree, a bachelor's, nothing too fancy.
And through that time, you were building apps in high school and in college, right?
Yes. So I started building apps when I was, I think, in 7th grade because my sister got the iPhone and I was obsessed with that. I was like, what is this device? It's so cool. And so then I saved up all my money to buy the iPhone 3G. And then I just fell in love with all the apps. The App Store had just come out. And so I had downloaded so many apps. I remember so many apps. Tap Revenge, the Twinkle, the precursor to Twitterific, AIM, all that stuff. And so just playing around with that gave me so much, just inspired me to make my own. And so, yeah, I then bought myself a programming book. This is before there were tutorials online, and taught myself.
Did you already have a Mac then?
I begged my parents to get me a Mac because they were trying to give us laptops for school. Yeah. And I had a hand-me-down Windows computer, and I was please, I really want to make apps, even though I had no experience. And so my parents were honestly, thank God, they were willing to trust or to believe in me and say, sure, we'll get you a Mac instead of a PC and see what you can do with it. So I did that.
This is a weird aside, but this is something that's been on my mind recently because I have kids that are they're young enough that they're not quite in that phase of they're going to do the thing that they do for the rest of their life or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I hear, your story right there, or when I was watching Steven Spielberg's the Fablemans movie, and I've
yes,
obviously read about his history too. And he talks about how like it was like his uncle or something. I think J.J. Abrams has a similar story where it's like somebody in their life spoiled them with some piece of gear that when you're in that certain part of your life where you get like super obsessed with something, if you're the right kid that gets handed the right thing that clicks with your brain, you get like such a crazy advantage.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's even right after college, like you might not be married, you might not have kids, but you still are now running a life sort of. But during that phase of high school, your life is in such a weird way and your brain is forming in such a weird way that like it's crazy how deep into the crevices of understanding something you can get, even though you're obviously ignorant about the rest of the world.
Yeah, 100%.
And it gives you such a leg up later on.
That really is exactly what it was. Like, it was the perfect timing. I obsessed over programming. I had no programming experience, but then I learned Objective-C, fell in love with it, and like just, it was my obsession. I followed all the iPhone, like tech blogs, the programming blogs, exactly. Because it was just that ripe age for me to be so obsessed with programming and Apple as well. So like yes, that's very formational for me. Getting the Mac.
That's so cool. So you were building apps. Did you release any of those like into the store? Like, are you one of those like early on, millionaire kids releasing a fart app or something?
No, not at all. My first app was extremely basic. It was called Shoot Around, and it was literally just like a camera feed, and then I had like lasers and you had buttons you would just press and it would shoot lasers at the camera feed. But it was all designed in Microsoft Paint. Like the buttons were just like blue circles. The lasers were literally
in Microsoft Paint. So you used the PC to create your assets.
Exactly, because I didn't know how to use any designer tools on the Mac yet, but I knew Paint.
That is interesting. I've never thought of that. I guess because Mac Paint was sort of famously with like the original Mac and stuff, but like there's not really a version of that.
Not
on
for like
modern
exactly
Macs.
Like for people who know nothing, which was me at the time. I was like.
Yeah,
I had to pull out my old Windows PC to use Paint, and so I would have recommended the app icon also made in Paint. It is not a good app icon at all. Like it's very bad. But at the time, I was like,
you need to send me that app icon, and I should make it the chapter art for this as a sketch version of that app icon.
I was proud of it at the time. I was like, oh, it looks like a camera. And it does not at all. But that was
that's
my
awesome.
first, I think, learning like there's more to making an app than just the code. Because I was like, you know what, here's the app. And then I was like, I gotta like make an icon for it. I gotta like make a website, or I gotta talk about it. And it was just like, whatever. I learned there's so much more that went into like this project. But I digress.
No, and that's the stuff that's so cool. Again, especially as a kid, getting, it's like doing projects in school is super helpful for understanding how to fill out forms and do all this stuff, but it's not self-motivated. But when it's something self-motivated, it's like a completely different thing, and it sets you up, going forward so much.
Oh yeah.
So okay, so you released some of them in the store. Did you make any sales? Were they all free? Like, what was the story there?
I did, yeah. So I ended up, then my next app I made was Camera Prime, and that actually did decently well at the time. It was a camera app with like extra features that the normal camera app didn't have at the time, like zoom or burst mode, like very basic features that just weren't there at all. And so that was my start, and that actually did kind of well. I made like several $100s a month just passively in high school, and so
which is amazing.
It was for high school. It was incredible. I was like, oh wow, I can just put this and get money every month and then use it on whatever. So that was also like really motivating just to know that it was possible. Like that was the first time I had any app that like got reviews. People reviewed it, said it was cool. And so I don't know, it was,
just that confirmation that human beings somewhere else in the world, especially when it's like not the US, although I guess you were already a world traveler at that point, but the idea of somebody else out in the world, like seeing a thing you made and having some experience with it is so magical.
Oh, it really was. Yeah. I remember posting about it like on the Mac Rumors forums, like trying to promote it, and people were just like, wow, what a cool app. And I was like, oh, like just, I don't know, just such great validation.
Ah, that's so cool. So this is in high school. Now this is around the time when GBA for iOS happened, right?
Yeah.
So what's the story there? Because that's sort of the beginning of your arc, so to speak, leading to now, I guess.
And it started just like as basically an accident. So I was fully focused on Camera Prime. That's what I thought was going to be like my main app, was what I was going to be known for. And then I just came across like an open source repo for a jailbreak Game Boy Advance emulator called GPS phone. And so I just found that, and I was like, wait, this is just the code. Could I download this code and run it locally, like for myself, without jailbreaking? Because I've never been a jailbreaker. I don't like it. It's not something I just want to do with my phone. I actually like my phone being like pristine in Apple, like the stock
people
experience.
that know you now for AltStore and Delta will probably be, and don't know you personally, will probably be surprised to hear that.
I know. It's funny to me because also people always say, oh, Delta was like around on the jailbreak phones for forever. And I was like, it was never available for jailbroken phones because the whole point was that I didn't want to jailbreak. So I was finding ways to not jailbreak and get out there.
And your reason for that, and let me paraphrase and then you correct me, but based on what we've talked about and what you've talked about before, is that you genuinely do value the like protection layers that Apple puts on iOS. You're not like iOS should be like Android and just be completely blown wide open. Like you genuinely buy into a lot of the arguments for why iOS is so locked down. It's just obviously you think not to the same degree that it is. Right?
Exactly. Like 99% I agree with like the status quo. I think it is more, I really do agree with the status quo for pretty much everyone. I don't want that to change. I just think, I love the iOS platform. I love how streamlined it is. Like, I don't like using my Mac. I actively dislike using anything that's not like an iOS device because it feels like work to me versus like using a phone. Yeah. Even if I'm using productive tasks, doesn't feel that way. And that's so I love it for those kind of reasons. And so, no, I would never want iPhone to become Android at all because exactly for the same reasons. I just don't want that experience. That's not appealing to me. I want the very polished, locked down experience. Yeah,
that's crazy. So GBA for iOS. This is before that existed. So you saw that there was a jailbreak emulator that existed.
And so I was like, okay, this is cool. I downloaded it and then it's like it didn't compile at all. But I was so determined. I was like, I want this on my phone. So I spent literally I think at the time 3 months hacking away at it, learning how to because I was so new to this whole thing. I just gotta learn and how to fix all these compiler errors. And then I finally got it compiling. And then I got out my phone. And I remember I loaded up Pokemon Emerald, and that was just one of those magical moments in my career of just wait, Pokemon is running on my phone, for real. I didn't jailbreak, it's just happening. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And so that's what I was you know what? I'm gonna make this, at least available for people. Again, it just wasn't in the App Store. I didn't think it'd be anything. So I just decided to polish it up a bit, make it a real app instead of this hack together thing. And I put it basically up on GitHub again, open source, and called it GBA.
And the original one was also for iOS.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Okay, it just didn't work.
It just was for jailbroken phones. So
right. It's only for jailbroken phones. Yeah. So you basically built it in a way where you could pull down the source code. Mm-hmm. If you had at the time, did you have to have your own developer account, or was that after they had opened? Okay, so you had to have a developer account. But if you had a developer account, you could pull the code down and then you could sideload it on your phone through Xcode.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what I thought was gonna be the end of it. And then what really just changed was when there was this service came out, Mac Build Server, and they just allowed you to hook up any GitHub project, open source GitHub iOS project, to their service, which re-signed apps with an enterprise certificate. So you could basically connect this and then re-sign it with enterprise certificate, and then anyone could download your app from GitHub if it was open source without having to jailbreak.
Okay. So, if you're not aware, the enterprise certificate program, the reason for that is if you're a company that builds an app internally, such as, for example, Apple, because they have apps that only employees can use and stuff, you can if you get this special certificate from Apple, you can build kind of your own little store on the web where people that are internal to your company can download and run an app that really is only for employees. It's a really specific lockdown program that Apple set up for companies. So you have to get one of these certificates, which is a whole process to get. And so this company, you said it was Mac? Which one was it?
Build Server.
Mac Build Server.
I don't
so
think
they set up some kind of system. They got a hold of one of these, I guess, and set up a system where you could have their build server do the thing where it downloads from GitHub repo, builds it, re-signs it with their certificate, and then they host it as well.
They hosted it, and so you could, in a way that you could just directly download it from your phone, like from Safari. And that
that's interesting. I missed this whole like era.
No, it was very interesting because this is before you had the free developer account. So there were very like little ways to install an app outside the App Store without paying Apple. And so this was
the developer account $100 then, or was that back when it was still really expensive too?
I think for enterprise it's a little more expensive to get an enterprise certificate. I'm not sure.
Well, for enterprise, I just meant for the idea of sideloading your own stuff.
It would still be $100.
It was $100, yeah. But that's a huge, especially for the market of people who want emulators.
Yep, exactly.
A significant portion of them, $100 is probably outside of their budget.
Exactly. So this was, I didn't expect it to be a big deal, but it turned out that just having the ability to download an emulator from Safari on your phone was a big deal. And basically that just blew up. And then people started posting about it and like making Reddit posts. And then I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize there was actually this much demand for this kind of thing. And it caught me off guard. And so that's when I decided to take it seriously. And I made GBA for iOS like my real endeavor. Because you know what? This is a real app. I'm going to now like spend my whole basically senior year of high school working on it, making a new version that can be released. And I like brought my best friend, Paul Thorson, on board to help me design the whole thing. And we were like, okay, let's do this. We're going to release this officially using this enterprise certificate method and just see what happens.
Could you sell it, or was it just totally free?
It was just free. We were just like wanting it to get out there. We thought it was so cool.
Yeah.
And also we're in high school, so we're like, I don't really care about the money part. But yeah.
And so starts the mythology of Riley's just so desperate for people to be able to play Pokemon on their iPhones. It seems like it's like your driving force as a human. It almost seems like
that is what it has felt like. Like I just want to get this out there, and I do believe that like it's so much better having it free out there and having all these people discover this amazing thing versus charging anything for it. Like I don't know. I get more value of seeing just like people love it so much.
And it probably wasn't necessarily strategically on your mind as a high schooler, but avoiding it's an area ripe for legal like scare emails. And so if you're not making a bunch of money for it, that probably helps in that regard quite a bit too.
Exactly. So that really did help. It just was safe. And then so we released that, and then was really big, really popular, got millions of downloads, and then
that's crazy.
It was pretty wild. And then the weird part was, because Apple shut down the enterprise certificate pretty quickly, but then there was a bug in iOS where if you just set your date back by 24 hours, then the enterprise certificate check didn't work. So you could just set your date back by a day and then go to a website and download GBA for iOS and it would work. And it was just a bug, very weird.
Yeah.
But that was like how people downloaded basically GBA for the entire lifetime, was that method. It was called the date trick. Very creative.
That's crazy. So it lived on for quite a while, even after they revoked that certificate.
Until they released an iOS update on my birthday that broke it.
Oh no,
that was fun. It was like and it fixed the bug I was relying on. I was like, oh, happy birthday to me.
Oh man. Okay, so at that point, not only was it nobody could download it, but it was also like
then it
didn't even work on people's phones, right? So it's now dead. Mm-hmm. You still in high school, or were you in college by this point?
I just graduated high school, and I was taking a semester off between high school and college at this point.
Okay.
So I was basically about to go into college. And so to me, I was like, you know what? Fine. The end of this
that was a
story,
fun experience.
Let's move on to something else. Let's move on to something normal. A normal App Store app, maybe.
Right. And then you just joined a large company and you spent the rest of your days pulling Jira tickets, right?
Yeah, doing nothing interesting. Yep. For sure.
So how do we get from this moment where everything seems pretty normal to, I guess Delta would be sort of the next stage?
Yeah. And then it wasn't even that long, but I was not planning to build another emulator, but Apple announced Swift like that summer. And then so I was at college. And I between my classes, I was like, I kind of wanted like a project to work on. And so I was like, you know what? I kind of want to learn Swift. I really should be learning Swift. Like I'm an iOS developer. It's something I should do. And so I was like, what's a project I should work on? And then I was like, I'll just make a fun little emulator for me. Like just like a toy thing to like just test my skills. Like just test like project architecture, like just a personal project, like all those kind of things, and learn Swift.
Was it just rebuilding like on your own the GBA for iOS
It
apps
was
then? Or was there something
rewriting-
different that you were going for?
It was rewriting the app to be more like extensible, better in general, but
Yeah.
not the core itself. Like I wasn't trying to write like the emulation engine myself, but
Right,
the
yeah.
GBA for iOS app was like thrown together for in high school, and I wanted now like to teach myself better architecture design. Like I wanted all of the cores like in their own frameworks, and I wanted like my own
Yeah.
framework that called through. Like I just wanted that type of thing, and so this felt like a cool way to build it out. And so that's what started with Delta, and it was just going to be my personal app until I went to WWDC that year, and I talked to App Review, and I was like, hey, is there any chance I could get this app approved? And then they were like, yeah, we don't see a reason we couldn't approve it. We just worry about like the open pipeline for games. But if you just, submit it to us and gave us a white list of games to approve, that should work.
And this was at WWDC, like you had a ticket, you were in
Yeah.
the labs, and so you could actually talk to people on the app review team.
Exactly, yeah. And so
Okay.
it was like, oh, cool. Took that as a great sign that I could get this in the App Store. So I was like, awesome. I'm now going to commit like so much of my time to making Delta an official app so it could be in the App Store. And yeah, this is back in 2015. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm so excited. And so then, I spent like the next year working on it, like again, while in college, but like spending so much time on it. And then I went back to WWDC the next year, talked to them, and they were like, actually, no. Like, and they're like,
Was it the same people?
I did talk to the same person, and he was
Oh,
like,
no.
I talked to the higher ups. We don't allow emulators. And I was like, and it's nice to hear that officially, because that was never an official rule.
At least it wasn't after you had submitted, I guess.
But I mean,
goodness.
I was pretty pissed. I was like,
Yeah.
I had spent my whole past year like building this thing because you said I could. Well, I wouldn't have wasted that much time building it. And so I was pretty pissed off at the time, and I was just like, what am I supposed to do now? But it was just like also at that time, Apple announced the whole free developer account, or that you could install apps for free with Xcode with an Apple ID without having to pay.
Yeah, there's essentially a free mode to a developer account now where, you can like build your own apps. There's limits, like you can only run those apps for 3 days after you push it from Xcode.
You get 7 days, but you only get 3 at a time. You can only have 3 at a time installed, and you can only register 10 app IDs in a week. There's so many weird restrictions.
Yeah, there's a bunch of limitations to stop somebody if anybody were to ever try to make
crazy
some
concept.
sort of mechanism where you could like
Who would ever do
make
that?
it easy for people to sideload.
Yeah. But no, so exactly. There were so many restrictions in place because Apple literally just did not want this to exist. But I was desperate. I was like, I have Delta. It's like close to completion. And I just saw that Apple announced this, and I just knew that there was some way to like use that to get Delta out there. It was basically just what I knew. And so then I spent the next like few years working on what that was and like researching. I had to learn so much about like code signing. I had to learn how the whole process worked. But it was all just because like I already had Delta ready to go or close to ready to go. And I just needed to get it out there somehow. And I refused to just give up on it because I was like, this deserves to be in the world. Everyone, people want it. So so I worked on that for several years, and that's what became the first version of AltStore when that finally launched.
Okay, so this is all while you're in college then still?
All while college, and then continued after I graduated. I graduated, I went to working full time on building AltStore while also like doing contract work to fund that.
Gotcha. So this is what you want to do in your head was Delta and AltStore, and somehow build this into some kind of system that ultimately lets you release Delta.
Exactly. Yeah.
We haven't actually talked much about Delta at this point, but like, it was basically a nice iOS feeling app emulator, right?
Yeah.
What were the main, like the original platforms that you supported, or like consoles that you supported?
I mean, pretty much all the ones today except for Nintendo DS. So it was Nintendo, the NES, SNES, N64, and then Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Those 5.
And you could, in the emulators themselves, there's all sorts of different projects out in the world. So it was, I mean, I'm sure it was work, but it was relatively easy to like pull those in and run those on.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, relatively easy compared to. I mean, yes, compared to building the app, pulling them in was not the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to build. Like, if I had to build the emulator core, yes, absolutely would have been the hardest part. But yes, it was kind of like a fun challenge of like, how do I take this code base and then incorporate it into like the framework that I was building, what I call Delta Core.
Yeah.
And so it was like a fun, just challenge for me doing all that.
And the emulator itself then is essentially running in a box in your app, and then the
Yes.
frame and the buttons.
Yeah, that is exactly
and
what
the
it is.
design of the emulator like UI. That's where your Delta, the app that you're writing, is coming into play.
Yeah, and so I'll say my wanting to have a good architecture for this has paid off very well. Like, it's pretty easy for me to take just a new emulator core and wrap it up in the Delta Core framework that I've made. And then
cool.
everything just works. Because it's basically like, I need to find what's the input mechanism, how do I get a video buffer out, how do I get the audio buffer out. And once I just connect all those pieces, then like you said, it just runs its little box and it outputs to Delta Core, which does all the other stuff.
I imagine that makes the different like designs that you have work as well, like
Yes.
colors or something like that, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's cool. Okay, so Apple releases a new mechanism to make it free for people to run apps in some capacity
Yes, very
from
basic,
Xcode to their phone. You, in your maniacal goal to make Pokemon available for people on their iPhones,
Crazy world domination
you're like,
plan.
I'm going to do this. We're going to come up with a way. And so you spent years literally just trying to figure out a mechanism that is, what I'm gathering based on the end result, your goal was to make it as seamless as you could experience for people.
Exactly.
To be able to download this. So what did all that kind of lead up to ultimately then? The
you mean
first like version of this.
So the first version was a glorified Delta installer. Like, so when we first launched, like I launched it back in 2019, like September 2019. That was the launch of AltStore, and I said everything about how it's a storefront, but it literally could only install Delta. It was just a Delta installer, basically because I just wanted to like make sure this whole thing worked before I opened up this whole platform or something. And so I launched that. It could just install Delta, and
what is that? Is it a website?
Oh,
is
so
it a app?
It is itself a native app. And so how that works was I had a desktop app you downloaded on your computer for Mac or PC called AltServer. And then you use that program to you give that program your Apple ID and password, and then it signs in with Apple, configures your account, and then re-signs the AltStore app and installs it onto your phone. And then it's as if you were the developer that installed it yourself in Xcode. And so it's an incredibly
so
janky.
Crazy.
No, it's so many pieces, but the important thing was how can I put it together in a good enough like flow? Like, it just had to be a basic. And now we asked people for their literal Apple ID and passwords.
Yeah.
That was the biggest deterrent by far. And it was funny to see that a lot of people didn't care. Like, people just put it. And I was like, oh man. Like, we tell people, make a fake account, use a throwaway account. We don't care. Like, we literally don't care what you give us. We just need a valid Apple ID that we can configure. Most people
because
still
Apple doesn't have APIs for you to do this.
Yes.
Like to ask for a token, for example.
Correct. Yeah.
For some sort of two-factor auth or something system, because this isn't a mechanism that they necessarily wanted to support explicitly.
This did predate, I think, the App Store Connect API, but even now you can't do what AltStore does with the official API. Because, exactly.
Yeah, like there's apps out there, other iOS developers might be aware of a bunch of different apps out there that let you do a lot of App Store Connect things inside of an app. And those use the App Store Connect API, but I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody. I'm fairly certain that most of those are still doing quite a bit of like web scraping and stuff to do some of the more advanced things because it's just, there's not APIs for that.
Yeah. And same thing. So we were using the APIs that Xcode was using at the time, basically just to generate the free developer account and everything. So not official.
That makes sense. That's crazy though. I didn't know there was a PC version of this as well.
Oh yeah.
So what did you build this Mac and PC app with?
Oh, I had the original plan was to use, which is stupid. I wanted to use Objective-C and use the Microsoft's like Win Objective-C framework to port that. Yeah, and so I wrote like all of the code signing and like Apple code in Objective-C to plan like to reuse it. And then I could not get it to work at all. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm just gonna have to write this from scratch all over again for Windows. And so I did. I literally took like, I think a week, and it was awful. And I just rewrote my entire code base for Alt Server on the Mac in C++ for Windows. With also, I had no experience before this. I was like, okay, I just gotta learn this. All I knew was the C++
What
I
was
learned
the
in
UI?
college. It's a menu bar app. So
Okay, that's fair.
which is also
So there
how I
didn't
got
need to be
away
that
with
much.
able to do it. On the Mac too. Yeah.
Okay.
It was just a menu bar app. You tapped it and then you said install AltStore, and it would install AltStore. So
Man, imagine like how much easier that would be now with
I know.
with all these like AI tools
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
like, hey, give me that same thing but in this language.
There's so many ways. Like today would be so much easier. Also, because Swift now works natively on Windows. That was like what
Yeah, that's
kills
true.
me.
There's also a whole bunch of cross-platform frameworks that
I
are
banked
pretty
on
easy to
Objective-C
use.
being the cross-plat, which was so stupid in hindsight. I was like, oh. So now the only Objective-C in AltStore was my core framework that I intended to port to Windows that never did. So I'm like, whatever. Unfortunate.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went through all of this. You built a surprisingly smooth experience to essentially release Delta or to
Yep.
make Delta available.
Yep.
But you called it AltStore.
Yes.
What leading into that, like the launch itself that you did for AltStore/Delta, were you sort of marketing it as this is a new alternative store, or were you really marketing the emulator Delta?
I was marketing them as the store because I wanted to do more with AltStore, and to me, so much of the motivation for doing this was that if I'm going to do all this effort to get Delta out there, I might as well do it in a way that other developers can take advantage of it as well.
Yeah.
And so that was so motivating for me because I don't know if I would have done all this truly just for Delta, but just knowing that this could allow other types of apps, I don't know, that was cool. So then that was motivation behind that. And then
what was the reaction to both the emulator and the AltStore?
I mean, emulator was great because there was like this core community of people who had been following me since the GBA days. And so they were stoked to have that out. They loved it. There's an official way to finally install it. I will never forget though, like the reaction to AltStore, like all the comments were like, this is stupid. Apple's going to shut this down immediately. Why would anyone waste their time on it? And I was like, just like rolling my eyes, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is the reaction from everyone. And so, but whatever. So but it was still exciting. Like it made a lot of rounds. So people liked it. They thought there's no way it's going to stick around. Apple's going to shut it down immediately.
Yeah.
And then to their credit, the next month, Apple did shut down the private APIs we were using to sign in to App Store Connect and make all these developments. So that was a very stressful time. And I had to figure out Apple's new authentication mechanism and write that in AltStore, and it was completely broken. So for about a couple of weeks.
Do you think they changed it for that reason?
100%. It was 100%.
Okay. Well, I didn't know if it was one of those where it's like they made changes and it broke you, or if it was like they made changes to make it harder for you to do
We
this.
were using something, like by the time AltStore launched, Xcode was no longer using this thing anymore. So it was like it's just timing, but it was literally like 2 weeks afterwards, and then it just like shut down in a way. I was like, And again, I mean, whatever. Good for them. Good move. Like, whatever. So
I wanted to talk about this actually. Yeah. Even just what you just said there. This has been a thing through, I mean, we'll get to, you parading through the EU and talking to Parliament and whatever. Yeah. You have maintained that exact attitude frequently, and I've been so impressed by it. I think I told you this in person last year too, but like, I feel like most people who do the type of thing you're doing, where you're pushing boundaries and trying to open things up, there's this like what's antagonizing attitude where it's like any opportunity to cry foul, it's like anger. Look, they're the big man's pushing us down or whatever.
Yep.
And I'm not that personality type. I find it kind of grating, but I also appreciate that that's how change happens or whatever, right? Like I kind of had that attitude, but you have managed somehow through all of this to keep a very understanding attitude. Like you are not shy to be like mad or angry about things. That I don't want to say like you're passive.
Yeah.
But like when you frequently you'll say that like fair enough, and you'll explain exactly why they would do what they do. What is that? Just something about your personality that you've always had? Is that something you've had to work on? Were you like that in the early days, or?
Well, first, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that because yeah, something I do try really hard with, and I don't know. I'm kind of like you. It's like I don't like that approach in general. Like it turns me off a little bit. But I don't know. To me, this is like on like a lot of my like New Zealand upbringing. I don't know. Like it's like this is kind of like the cultural there. It's like I don't know. Like chill out. Like things are just not that big a deal, and it just just a mix of things. I also just respect Apple so much. I love them so much, and I don't hate Apple. I really don't. And I know this is just such a complex issue. And I just also know that there's so many strong opinions on both sides, and so yes, it's just very complicated. But yeah, I do it because I think it is just the best way to honestly make change. I don't think just yelling about stuff is the way that the biggest change will be made. We've very much tried to work with Apple, like especially in the beginning after we launched like AltStore PAL. We were very much trying to work with them and hopefully trying to align with them. They did not return the favor. They did not work with us. And so we had to change our tactics. But so exactly, like, it's kind of like, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I do think they are trying here, but I'm not afraid to call them out if they do something wrong. Exactly. So I think that's important too, because we can't be like bullied around by them either. We have to like, and also it's like, if you yell about everything, then the stuff you do yell, then just, it doesn't matter. So it's a mix of all that.
Like, yeah. And there's a lot of that where people, I mean, we all know the people on Twitter who, when they cry foul, your immediate reaction isn't like, oh no, what did Apple do this time? It's kind of like, all right, let's dig in and see. Because sometimes it is legitimate. Sometimes it's just like you're screaming over nothing.
No, fully that. Exactly. And so, yeah, like you said, it is good that other people are doing it because it's not bad to have that necessarily. But yeah, it's just not what I want to be doing. I don't think it's the best way to get to. It's just definitely not the best way to change opinions. I know that for sure. Like,
yeah, right. Sometimes it's the best way to make change. It's like violence, right? Mm-hmm. I don't like violence. That is not something that comes naturally to me by any means. Yeah. But I can also appreciate that sometimes in extreme circumstances, I'm not advocating. I'm just saying it can precipitate change, right? Mm-hmm. Like clearly. And so yeah, it's just something, I find very endearing about your role in this whole saga that we're all going through right now is, I find you, sorry, I know it's very uncomfortable to have praise heaped on you.
No, please,
but like,
keep going. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
You're like, no, not at all. It's just something I find, it makes me really want to listen to people who have a tempered mindset about things and who will call out positives in their enemies, so to speak. Now, again, not saying that you're saying they're your enemy, but it can easily get turned into these lines of two sides of a battle. And I feel like it feels like you all have intentionally kind of avoided, that in a way, which is surprising given where you're at in all of this. Gotcha. Well, anyway, sorry, that was a weird aside.
No,
you brought it up and I wanted to make sure we talked about that because I find it fascinating.
No, thank you for saying that. I'm glad that is appreciated because we do try really hard when we're in the middle of all this, and sometimes we do have to restrain ourselves. There have been plenty of times I've been more livid than what's come out professionally from us, and it's a balance.
I have to imagine so. And so I guess this was not necessarily your first time dealing with this because you did previously, but it wasn't your enterprise certificate in the past, so it was a little more indirect, but this was pretty directly like aimed at you. But you figured out a mechanism to deal with this, it sounds like.
And then we've not too interesting, just like a whole different authentication mechanism. We had to reverse engineer, and then but once we did that, honestly, Apple didn't really mess with us again after that. So it was just kind of us existing on the side in this weird unofficial world.
And so Delta, again, was still totally free at this time?
Yep, totally free. But
was your entire income coming from contract work then? Or did you find a way to sort of get support for this whole project?
So it was before I commit went to AltStore full time and working on Delta, I was talking to my, at the time, roommate, Shane Gill, who became my co-founder later. And he was pitching me on the idea of Patreon. Because my idea honestly was like to put this out there, AltStore as a tool, and then kind of move on. Like I would support it, but like it wouldn't be like my main job. And Shane was the one that was like, hey, there's like real demand like in the creator economy. People really want to support independent creators right now. Like it's just like, yeah, because he was supporting a few, and he was like for YouTubers especially. And so I kind of like was thinking about that. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I could try just making a Patreon. And so when I launched AltStore at the time, I also launched my own Patreon. And the way I like tried to give benefits or incentivize it was, if you join it, you get access to the beta versions of our apps. So Delta and eventually
That's
Clip.
such a good, I feel like that's a really good mechanism, because it's like, yeah, your most sort of devoted, the ones who are getting the most value out of it, they're going to be the most interested in that.
I really
but for
loved
most people, it's fine.
It works really well, I think, for certain types of apps, but for so many reasons of people don't want to pay for emulators. There's like a lot of weird stuff with it in general. So it was like Delta just was always going to be free. Like I just keep that simple.
Yeah,
but,
there's like a cultural thing there. Right?
Yeah. And then there's other stuff like I don't like the idea of having like a paid version of an app, because it means all your users or majority of users are not getting the best experience. Like it just like if you have a premium version, only a subset's going to ever use that. And that's just like unfortunate for me. It's like as a developer, I want my users to be using the best version of the product. And so this, has just been an interesting way of doing that, where everyone gets the features eventually. Like the stuff I put out for free to everyone is polished, it's tested, I'm okay with it. But if you want to donate to us, you can just have early access to the new features. And I honestly think that's a really good structure for apps like this. And we also,
I like it. And again, with the emulator community in particular, it's like early access to hacky or less tested things is a high value thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. It just
it probably wouldn't work for your calendar app or your
who knows?
Personal CRM app.
Yeah.
Well, but like those are things where people, it's like they need to be solid for most people.
Mm-hmm. But I'm like OpenGLES 3.0, try it out. Let me know if it breaks your games or not, and something. And people are like, cool.
Yeah, that's almost part of the fun of that community, right? Is like trying and things breaking and everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. So okay, so you had a way to monetize it at some point, or maybe right away. This became sort of your full time.
Yeah, right away. So once it launched,
Okay, and so at first it's literally AltStore is just a Delta launcher.
Yeah.
How quickly or did that change to being there's more things that you can make available?
The beta version of AltStore, I did the same thing with AltStore. That could install like more apps. So as Delta could be installed in the free version, but if you joined the Patreon, you could actually just sideload any IPA you found. It wasn't like sources, wasn't built, like you couldn't browse it, but if you just downloaded an app file, you could install it. And so then we did it. We officially released like that functionality, I think like several months, like 6 months later or so. And then at that point, it was a tool. It was, you could find Delta in the app, or you could download apps outside, like on the web.
Where are people finding? They have to be unsigned IPAs. Like,
I mean, they could be signed or unsigned. I re-sign it no matter what.
It. Yeah,
but it's just an IPA out there in the world.
Where are those coming from? Other than, I mean, when I was in the Windows Phone world, I know people were taking cracked IPAs of famous apps so they could like build clones or something. But other than that, like what was there a marketplace, or not a marketplace, but was there a community of people releasing IPAs like this?
Yeah, like a surprisingly a large amount, because since GBA came out and I gave up, there had been like this black market of enterprise certificates being used.
And that was how people were doing it before, was with these enterprise certificates.
So I wasn't part of that, but then I came in with AltStore, then people were like, oh, this is better than this weird enterprise certificate. And so there were just a bunch of like edge case apps that built up.
Yeah, exactly. And eventually you released at least one more of your own, because Clip was
eventually came out,
that was in the original AltStore at some point, right?
Yes.
Not original as in when it first launched, but before AltStore PAL.
It was supposed to be there at literal launch, but then there was
really? Okay.
There was a last minute bug that made it not work, and so I had to pull it, and that's what killed me, because I wanted to launch AltStore with Delta and Clip, because I was like, it is a store.
So you had two apps.
And then I had to launch it with Delta. I was like, But whatever, it was fine, and like in time, it was fine.
And a real quick aside on Clip, mostly just me begging anybody at Apple who's listening to please, for the love of God, make it possible to put these on the store. What is Clip?
Clip is my clipboard manager, and all it does is it just runs in the background and listens for whenever you copy something, and then it shows you a little alert, say, would you like to save this to your clipboard? And if you just tap that alert, saves your clipboard. That's it. And it's just so useful. I use a clipboard manager on my Mac all the time.
Yes. And for anybody who doesn't know, clipboard managers are basically, I mean, whenever you copy something, it goes into your clipboard. And if you copy something else, it overrides what goes into your clipboard. At the most basic level, all a clipboard manager is doing is saying, every time you copy something, it adds it to a list instead of just overriding it. And that way you can actually access previously copied text. And it's one of those tools that, like, probably most developers listening have used some in some capacity, but it's like once you get used to the idea of a clipboard manager running, your computer feels completely broken not having it, because the amount of times I'll copy two different things so I can paste two different things somewhere is ridiculously frequent. And I actually use Paste. It's a clipboard manager on the Mac, and it has an iOS app. But it doesn't integrate the way that yours does.
You need that. That's the feature. It needs to be automatic whenever you copy something. And Clip isn't perfect. That's the original version of Clip that I was gonna launch in AltStore was perfect. It ran in the background, and you didn't need to interact at all. It just would save everything in the background.
And what was the mechanism you were using for that?
That was a combination of I used like a silent audio track just to run the background using the music thing. I stole that from Pastebot from back in the day on iPhone. And then I used, it was an audio unit, I think, extension to like one of the weird app extensions. And that had permission to access the clipboard in the background. So I had this weird extension that I would basically funnel audio data into that was like JSON data. And then I would be like, okay, read the clipboard. And it would send it back to Clip. But it worked. It was perfect. And that was what I was going to launch. And then that's a functionality that broke right before, because in iOS 13, Apple released iOS 13, that broke that bug, and I was like, well, now Clip doesn't work at all.
What was the battery impact of that?
I didn't do any tests. It didn't seem to be that big a deal in practice for me.
Massively,
no. And
obviously, it'd be better to have a native API for it, but
for sure, absolutely. But it was good enough.
But then you didn't launch it with that version.
But yeah, it's because it didn't work at all. So I was like, I had to hold it back until I found another workaround. And that's the new notification. It shows a notification when the clipboard changes and you tap that.
So you have to actually engage with it. Because at least it's possible.
A notification extension does have access to the clipboard because it's in the foreground. That's the differentiator. If your extension or app is in the foreground, it can access the clipboard. If it's in the background, it can't.
Okay. So. Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you take nothing away from this whole episode, you know, more important than any of the accomplishments that Riley has done, it's that clipboard managers should exist on iOS in some capacity, and we should all pressure Apple.
Yeah, like when I use my Windows PC for programming, it has a built-in clipboard manager. I'm like, wow, so
built
nice.
Into Windows?
Yeah.
Itself?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember it being built into like Visual Studio.
But no, it's just a full system-wide. I'm like, well, it's easy.
Yeah,
someday
it is. It is easy. It's just check the box to implement it. Yep. It shouldn't be that crazy though. Yeah, it feels like the type of thing that the problem is it has to be built by the platform.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, okay, yeah. So Clip eventually came, but that's an app built by you.
Yep.
People can download their own IPAs from wherever and run those. But when or did you ever get third parties basically releasing their apps through the AltStore? And what was that process?
That process was basically we discovering what are the most popular IPAs people were installing at the time. And we're like, oh, you know what? We should try to reach out to some of these and have them like officially like in the store. Because that was like the next step in our evolution. We're like, okay, now it's an IPA installer. We want a store. We want to be able to, you receive updates, like you get automatic updates and you can view store pages. So then that was our next step in AltStore. And I think that came maybe a few months later, a year later or so, and we launched with like Dolphin, the Dolphin emulator.
Oh yeah.
And UTM was one of our first.
Which one's UTM? I don't know. Oh, Dolphin is for the Wii, right?
So Dolphin's for the Wii and stuff, but UTM's for PC. It's a PC emulator, so you can run Windows.
Oh wow, okay.
And stuff. And so we're like, hey, look, you can run Wii, you can run Windows, all through AltStore. And so that was like our first batch of apps, again, just showing stuff like that. And then
Cool.
that's what we were for then a while.
So you had just kind of a collection of sort of fringe apps that couldn't get through app review, but it worked. And
Yes.
it was, there's obviously limitations, especially if you're on a non-developer free account, but like you had a mechanism to make this possible, and you had a Patreon base that could support you
Yes.
continuing to build on it for a while. And then the world
Yes.
exploded,
Basically,
or
yeah.
at least the European Union exploded. So just walk us through that story that led to essentially AltStore PAL.
Yeah, so much. And so I'm working on AltStore, and I'm seeing the political wins. I'm seeing that Europe's investigating. I'm seeing that America is investigating Apple. It's like in 2020, 2021.
Yeah, and Japan and Korea,
Yeah.
and it's kind of everywhere.
And so I see it all coming, but I'm also like, I'm burnt out. Like at this point, I truly am so burnt out, unable, I was not able to do much at all for like almost a full year, because I was just like so exhausted from AltStore and like handling everything. And it was just me at the time. And I really was like feeling the end of it. And I was like, I really felt like, is this something I want to stick with? Do I have the energy to keep this up? And I was like, so I saw that the political winds were changing. I saw that this could be something in the future. And so I was like, oh, I want to stick this out, but I don't know if I can do this alone. And so that's when I was like, realized I need to have Shane come on board. Like he'd been with me like this whole time. We'd always like talk together through ideas and everything.
And what's been the big help with bringing somebody on then? Is that on the development side? Is that on the just having another person to absorb the stress of everything with you?
No, yeah, having another person is the number one thing, because I was pretty depressed as well during this like year, because I had all these like AltStore was doing so well, but I was doing it myself, and so it was like very isolating. And
Yeah.
I would be just at home, be like, I'm doing my own thing, but everyone else just has normal jobs, and it felt just alone. And so him coming on board to just be there with me through it all, it's like probably the hugest for my mental health. Just gave me so much.
I think that's I almost said not talked about. I think people talk about it plenty probably, but like it is one of the weird things about being especially a solo indie developer is I think it's maybe David Smith. I forgot who it is. Somebody's talked about this where like you do a launch and it's like it feels like this big thing and you've been building up to it for months, you know, where you have this anticipation feeling. And obviously there's a version of it where it fails and that's sad and everybody can imagine that. But the one that's the weirdest is when it succeeds. Mm-hmm. The numbers are big. You have a bunch of people reply on Twitter to say, you know, good job. And then, you know, you go pick up your kids from school or you go whatever and you're like doing laundry and cleaning your dishes that evening. And it's just like normal.
Yeah.
And there's almost something deeply depressing about that.
No, it really was. Yeah.
It makes your life feel almost not meaningless. That's the wrong word, but it's like, yeah, you build this thing up in your head so much because it could go wrong. And then when it goes right, it's almost sad. And simply having a group of people that you can share in the excitement with, whether that's in person or even just a friend group of other people who do the same thing, who can get excited with you. It's surprising how much of a difference that makes. Because at a company, you get that naturally.
Yes.
And on your own, you just don't.
And so I had to learn, but that's exactly it. I just had to learn that myself. Like 2020 basically was a great year for AltStore. And then 2021, I crashed. Because it was just like that, I just was, it was such a ride and wave. And then I just was by myself still. Nothing had changed. And I was like,
yeah, your actual life wasn't really actually different, even though it felt like it should be.
So bringing him on board changed all that. The original pitch was to move to New Zealand together. I was like, let's go, let's do this, let's go back. I want to go back to like my home country. Amazing. It was in the middle of COVID though, and they did not.
Yeah, I was about to say New Zealand famously was very open.
I mean, I was wanting to get in that bubble.
Easy to get to.
I was like, I want in there, but then.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So then Shane, I'm a citizen. Shane is not, so he was not able to come.
Yeah.
So we moved to Dallas, Texas instead, to my other home.
Just as exciting.
The New Zealand of the Midwest. You know, that's what they say. So.
Do you consider it the Midwest?
I mean, yeah, that is what we say here. Yeah, the Midwest.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm going to do my best not to go off really far on this, but I'm fascinated by this topic. I have
Yeah.
family in Oklahoma, and every time I talk to them, I'm like, "What region do you consider yourself in?" And they're like, Oklahoma? Like, I don't know." And I was like, "What do you call that? It's not the
Yeah.
South."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Texas in my head has always been Texas.
Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, we are pretty Texas, but if I were to describe where we are, I'd be like, like the Midwest, whatever.
You'll say the Midwest. Oh, that's
Yeah.
super interesting to me. Okay. Anyway, yes, we'll move on. But okay, so you got somebody on board, which I can already predict was unbelievably necessary for you
Yes.
to survive the insanity that happened. So then, after you brought him on board, how did the insanity go?
We just were like, okay, we're like, let's hit the ground running. We knew this was going to happen soon, so we just like worked together. We were super like efficient. We figured out our whole like work schedule and everything, and so then we spent like a good.
And this is going to happen soon, meaning some sort of
there were
opening
laws,
up of the App Store.
At this point, the DMA was still like about to be passed, and so we were just preparing for what it was. And then I'll just fast forward to then the DMA base finally was passed. Like the actual law came out, was passed, and then that's when we were like, okay, this is it. Before Apple does anything, we were like, okay, we know this is now a real thing, and so we
And
really
the DMA, for anybody who missed all this, which is totally understandable because it was a lot.
So much. Yeah.
The European Union passed a law to basically, well, it had a lot of different things that targeted a lot of different big tech companies. But with regards to this story and Apple specifically, it meant that at least in some capacity, Apple had to open up the App Store to third-party apps, sort of.
Yep.
What that necessarily meant, nobody fully knew yet, but it was going to happen. And so that's the stage set for, something's going to happen and you're trying to prepare for it.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, we were prepared for that. And then I'll just fast forward to when everything really changed was last year when Apple announced how they were going to comply. Because we knew that there was just going to be a way to install apps outside the App Store. And we had no idea what that would look like. We honestly were hoping for not third-party app stores. We were hoping that it was just going to be like Apple would be like, you can just sideload from the web or something.
Yeah.
And then we were like, oh, we'll turn AltStore into like this discovery platform.
Right.
That's not AltStore. But then Apple announces in January, nope, okay, third-party app stores, a full thing, and you got to have all these ridiculous requirements, like the standby letter of credit. You got to have a subsidiary in like Europe, and we're like, oh my god. And so that was January 25th, and the law went into effect March 5th, and we were like, okay, we have a little over a month to do all of this, to turn AltStore into a full app store, to get this money, to like
form a corporation in Europe.
That was probably the most stressful like month of the year, because we were just like, what the hell are we doing? And man, and thank God for Shane. He did so much of like the business. He was able to get us a standby letter of credit. We found people at Morgan Stanley who believed in us, just working so hard to do that. And we did that for a month, and then we were coming up on the March 5th deadline. That's when the law went into effect and Apple had to comply.
Right.
And so Apple then had this workshop in like Cork, Ireland, for alternative marketplaces to like go and get help. And this is like 2 weeks before March 5th. And so me and Shane were like, okay, you know what? We're getting close to like, we're pretty close to launch. We have it working. We should apply. We should go to this court, or we should go to this lab, get any help we need. And so that's kind of what we did. And by the time we got there, it was like the end of February, and we had everything working. Like I had worked on AltStore. It worked as an app store with the new marketplace kit framework that Apple had released. And so basically we showed up day one and we're like, cool, we're ready to launch. And they were not ready for that. And it was very clear that Apple had no idea that we were this close to being ready to launch. And they just flat out were not ready in time for the deadline. And so that then was the whole bit where we were like, we're in Europe now. The app is ready to launch. We have all the things that we need from Apple. And Apple's like, we're going to take our time. We're going to see what we need to do here. And so we did a lot of stupid stuff during this time but we're just getting so frustrated because Apple was just delaying, like trying to delay us. And we were like, this is not fair. We are here. We're ready to launch. The law says you have to be ready by March 5th, Apple.
Yeah.
So we were pretty pissed off. So then the week of March 5th, we sent an email to Tim Cook, Craig Federighi, Phil Schiller. We just said, like, bluntly, we are here in Europe. We are ready to launch. Y'all are holding us up. Please approve our app so we can launch on the deadline. And we sent it to them. And then sure enough, the next day we got some progress happening on us. And then we also got a stern talking to from our contacts at the lab saying not to email Tim Cook again. But we're like, it's the only thing that works.
Yeah,
like Apple
just
just
like
will
the
take
don't
it.
never run to the press thing.
I
It's
know.
like,
And so
except for when you have to.
this is the beginning of us learning that Apple, like, again, we want to be working with Apple, and we've learned that Apple is not wanting to give an inch at all. And I think that's dumb of them, but whatever. So we're like, fine, we'll email Tim Cook. They finally notarized our test app, but then they still were holding up AltStore, and we're stuck in Europe. So we're just there for what ends up being 2 months just trying to launch.
Yeah, you were kind of bouncing all over the place, right? And weren't you going to like EU, is it parliaments? You were going to like special sessions they were putting on and stuff, right?
Because basically we were there, and then we got this email from the European Commission saying, hey, we're having this workshop in Brussels. Would you like to join? And we were like, you know what, since we're here in Europe, why not? Let's just like join this thing. And that's kind of why, like, what started this whole thing. So then we traveled to Europe, where then we were at this workshop. I asked Apple questions and whatever. And yes, it was a whole ordeal.
Yeah. And we're like running low on time. Otherwise I would want to dig into the press frenzy that you were sort of in the middle of, because you were being quoted in papers of record and like your faces and videos everywhere.
Yeah, it was such a surreal time, just because like we weren't doing anything all day in Europe, just waiting for Apple. So then we would like fill our times talking to reporters or like just doing whatever, because we're like, we literally can't do anything else.
Yeah,
and it was a whole frustrating part.
Hearing the beginning of this, I didn't realize you were just completely on your own until right before all this happened.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, I can't imagine that. Like doing that on your own. I mean, it also sounds like he was just really good at all the business stuff too. But like, even just having a person with you through all this must have been.
There's no way I could have done
the only thing that kept you going.
Because it's just us two backpacking through Europe. I have my iMac though, because I brought that.
I've seen pictures of you in cafes with an iMac.
Yeah,
is that real?
Yeah, because I love my iMac. It's great. I have a carrying case for it. And it's because I don't need to carry a separate screen. It's amazing. But then I'm traveling through Europe literally with a iMac. Sorry. A freaking iMac. And you know what? We're like, just whatever. Just so ridiculous. But we don't, at this point, we're like, we don't care.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, but eventually it gets through, right? What was the deal there?
So again, we're waiting. We're finally, and then it's a Friday night. We're at Tivoli, this amusement park in Denmark, in Copenhagen. And we're about to get on this roller coaster, and I get this email saying that the App Store guidelines have changed, and emulators are now allowed in the App Store.
Oh, right.
And we're like, this was the most caught off guard I had been this entire time. Like, was this move by Apple? And it was so surreal. Again, we're about to get on this roller coaster. I'm like, what? Like, this is our whole thing. Like,
did you get on the roller coaster?
Yeah, we did.
Did you get out of line? Okay,
no,
good.
We got on but my first my reactions, basically, me and Shane had different reactions. Shane was more of like, oh, what does this mean? Like, what? How, like, this is our whole bit. And I was honestly like, this means that we really got to them. Like, if they change the App Store rules to allow emulators, that means they're afraid of us. And so that gave me like the motivation, like, okay, let's do this. If they want to allow it in the App Store, let's put Delta in the App Store. Let's use that to get like notoriety for us. And so then we were like, that was the plan. And so I was giddy. That roller coaster, I was like, wow, Delta's going to be in the App Store. Like, and I just couldn't believe it. And it was so amazing.
What a surreal just memory to have.
Truly, again,
being on that roller coaster.
So my mind just going through everything and like, wow, this is like everything I've dreamed of. And so, yep, that happened. And then after they approved it, guess what? Apple was like, okay, you have the go ahead to launch AltStore now.
Yeah.
And we're like,
they waited until the leverage for why everybody would download it went away. And that your fear thing, that's at least my interpretation of those events is when they realized that they were going to have to let this through, and they probably knew how much demand there was going to be for an emulator.
Yep.
And a nice emulator that has already been proven to be popular. And they didn't want a really, really popular app that you can only get through a third-party store to drive loads of people, especially younger people, to normalize downloading these third-party apps that they don't really want people, or sorry, third-party stores that they don't really want people downloading in the first place, probably. And so they tried to cut it off at the knees by making that app available on the App Store anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll also say, this was the most impressed I was with Apple as like a strategic move. Like,
it's a very like, I respect you moment.
I truly was like, man, that is a very good move of y'all. And I'm very...
Because if you didn't do it, it then turns the like the PR against you, right?
Mm-hmm. It would have been an easy launch for us, but then they did that. I'm like, kudos, Apple. And again, like I like a good competitor move. I like to be challenged a little bit. And I was like, okay, good for you. I'm proud of y'all for doing that. Just did not think you would. But so then, yeah, whatever. And then so I think the next week, we then finally launched AltStore PAL officially with Delta in Europe and then in the App Store outside of the EU.
And AltStore PAL, the naming, just chef's kiss.
Oh, thank you.
PAL meaning, for those who don't know, if you're in North America and have never dealt with this, like that is what's the actual name? It's like the convention for the...
like the video format, like...
Yeah, it's like the format for
just
like standard def video broadcasts.
Yeah.
So in the States, it's NTSC, right? Yeah. And in Europe, it was PAL. And like PAL is 50 frames a second instead of 60 frames a second, and a couple interlacing details and stuff. But yeah, that was such a great name for like this version of the AltStore.
Thank you. No, once we came up with that, because we were like, we need to have a way of differentiating between existing AltStore and new AltStore. I didn't want to call it European AltStore. I didn't want to call it new AltStore. But then we were like, like region locking, and that's what led to the PAL Games.
Yeah, so good.
Pretty good. And then,
so good at the gaming level, like way of thinking about it too.
No. And then also say, we were talking to The Verge at this time, like, because we had like a launch article ready to go with them. Yeah. And oh man, they really wanted to spoil the name AltStore PAL ahead of time. They were like asking us like, can we please say it? And we're like, no, we're saving that. That's our service. You can't announce that.
They really wanted that scoop. That's amazing.
And so we're like, no, we're saving. And we're held firm on that one. I'm so glad we did, because like, no, it's got to be a surprise name. People can't expect it.
No, that's great.
So yeah.
And then Delta itself, it came out on the App Store, and just exploded. Like, it was the most popular app on the store for weeks, right?
For 2 weeks, it was the most popular app in the App Store.
How I have to assume, like, you don't have servers or anything, right?
No.
So
not
at
for
least
Delta.
There wasn't that.
Yeah.
But right for Delta. But I have to imagine your support, like, you were getting just an ungodly amount of email and everything, right?
Yes.
What was that like?
Well, that was Shane. I did not have to be the one dealing with it. But what happened was, we came home. Shane immediately went to Coachella, because we came home the weekend before Coachella, and Shane went to Coachella Music Festival, if anyone doesn't know.
Yeah,
and he was like, he wanted to go. And so he did that for the weekend after launch. And so I was like holding the fort of everything. I'm just like making sure everything landed. And then he came home, and to like say, I'm sorry for leaving for the weekend, he just like did support for like a week straight of just like going through all the emails we got.
Goodness.
And most support was actually AltStore. We did not get a lot of support for Delta. It was primarily, and to be fair, AltStore, because there were a lot of launch issues.
It makes sense, but just the scale, I have to imagine, was... Because, like, what are the numbers or have you shared that?
Oh, yeah.
For, millions. Like, how many downloads and
we're
stuff
over, like, 15 million, I think, the last I checked for Delta.
Like, that's an astronomical amount of people.
No, it's absurd. And in the first days, it was in the millions. And so, yes, there were immediately a lot. But, so there are not that many critical issues in Delta itself, which I felt really good about. But it had been around for years. And so it wasn't like a 1.0 app. AltStore PAL, the backend, very much was a 1.0. And
Well, I mean, Apple's backend was very much a 1.0, if that, right?
and it's still buggy. Like
Yeah.
like updating AltStore PAL is still broken on Apple's end, and it's very frustrating. And it's like
I work for a company that is all about working with Apple's StoreKit APIs, which are
right.
foundational
Yeah.
to a huge amount of how they make money.
Yep.
And that's something they really, really want people to use. I can't imagine what the marketplace APIs are like when it's, I don't want to throw around malicious compliance flippantly, but it's certainly not something they're excited to implement.
No, it's certainly not. And that's what I say. You can tell. It's not that they're trying to make it bad, but it's like, it's not. Okay. Actually, I don't want to throw hate out. I do think they did a lot, and the framework and the stuff they provide actually is pretty extensive. And I do think they are trying, but yes, it is still very buggy. And
would you say that this is one of those deals where it's like the company strategically at high levels obviously wants limits that are going to make your life difficult, but the engineers down at the level of people who are building this for you, there's still people at Apple who have pride in their work and want to make something good. Is that accurate?
Yes,
like,
very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's good at least. And to be clear, I feel similarly at the StoreKit level.
Exactly.
They do lots of things that are great. It's not like it's just there's oftentimes things that are frustrating in a way that you're like, how is a company of this scale still running into these kind of issues? But
and whatever. Yeah.
Software, right?
Yep. Exactly.
So that all went, the way that it went. But then that came out and it was a huge story. Obviously you had lots of support, but I assume that waned off over time.
Yeah.
But then over the year, there's still just been, every time a new app comes out, or what seemed like was happening often, a new app was trying to come out, and the notarization service, which was not supposed to be app review, which we haven't really discussed here, turned out to kind of actually be app review. And there has been lots of just flare-ups throughout the year of events happening. We don't have to go through like each one of those. Like people can read The Verge or whatever. But what has that experience been like? Because you traveling through Europe and going through this whirlwind experience, culminating in you riding a roller coaster and seeing stars and the future ahead of you.
Exactly.
That is like this weird, wild ride. But now you're at home and you're working, but there's still these occasional blasts that come up. How do you deal with those as they come in? Like, are you used to it at this point? It's just a thing that happens?
Maybe, yeah, kind of. I don't want, we've kind of settled into that flow of especially we have to split our time between Delta and AltStore. And so that's kind of like what we do mostly. So I'll work on Delta like for a little bit to get an update out. And then we'll focus on AltStore and try to see, okay, what are some apps out there that we can promote or something like that. And so we've been doing back and forth, but most of our biggest opportunities have just happened. Like one of the biggest, like Fortnite went.
Yeah. That was what, November? That was later last year, right?
Yeah, that was back in June, July, or
was it over the summer? Okay.
Yeah.
But either way, Fortnite famously did their whole own, kind of throw some shade at Apple, got into a big fight, and they pulled everything from both Apple and Google. And so they weren't available at all. Now they set up their own store as well, right? So there is a Fortnite store in the EU that you could call a competitor in a sense. It's the same kind of conceptual thing as AltStore, except it's focused on games. And Fortnite's available there. But then Epic invested in you all, right?
Yes.
And then they brought Fortnite to AltStore as well?
Yeah, and that was a whole thing because going in, we had the same opinions towards Epic. I think most people in the Apple community were like, oh my God, y'all are just like yelling about all this stuff. You're doing this so stupidly. Like, why are you being so aggressive? And so basically, it was like June. And then we just got this email out of the blue from them saying, hey, we would love to talk. We saw your work on AltStore. We'd love to see if there's any way we could work together. And my first thought was, no. Like, what do they want from us? Do they want us to put Delta in Epic? We're not going to do that. But Shane was like, you know what? Yeah, maybe we should like give it a chance or like see.
Yeah. Worth a discussion.
Yeah. But the thing that really changed it was right around this time, Apple rejected UTM, the PC emulator from AltStore PAL.
Yes.
And we were like, what? Like, this is the first time they'd like blocked an app, and we were like,
yeah. And for anybody listening and confused by what we mean by rejected, because like there is no app review process for a third-party store that Apple doesn't run, but there is a system called Notarization, which everybody kind of agreed this seems like it's a good thing that they still have, because it's similar to what they have on the Mac, which is like you have to send your app binary essentially to Apple, and they run a bunch of security checks as well as keep track of like I don't know what they're keeping track of, some sort of ID on it basically. So they have a kill switch so they can kill access to the OS to even run it. But it's basically just a security layer. It's like you can put whatever you want. There's torrents on the Mac that are notarized. Like it's not a way for them to do their normal app review thing. It's supposed to be a way for them to just make sure that there's some security on iOS still. So everybody thought that was okay. But then what you all were running into with UTM was they were rejecting apps, not because of security reasons, but just because
they just don't want it.
They don't like them.
And this is, this is when we were like, again, we were giving benefit of the doubt this whole time. And this was the first time we're like, Apple, we've kind of trusted that you're going to not do this kind of thing. And so that we talked to them for a bit, but then we talked to them at Dub. Actually, at Dub, I reached out to like the app review team. I had a lab with them, and I explained, hey, this should be really allowed. And then like a couple of weeks later, I got a call from app review, and they called saying, we have some great news. We've decided to allow UTM into the App Store as well as approve it for you.
Wait, what?
Yeah. And then I was like, on the phone, I was like, and again, I was like, it was delivered perfectly. The person on the phone just said it in the perfect hat. I was like, oh man, I can't believe this.
Oh, it's like Get Out or something. Yeah, no, exactly. Smiling and like creepy.
But again, I was like, oh, I can't believe it. But I respect this delivery.
Wait, I don't remember that. So is UTM on the App Store?
It is in the App Store now because they didn't want to give it to us.
I completely missed this. So wow, that's so bizarre.
And so this is the second time in like a few months that Apple had changed their App Store rules because we had an app in AltStore that was like a cool idea. And so
that's what's crazy is that was one that existed. Well, I guess so did Delta in your previous AltStore.
Yes, exactly.
But obviously the mechanism was way different. And it's the same thing. It's like they don't want people normalizing the behavior of like, yeah, go download third-party stores.
Yep.
And so anything that threatens them, that's so wild.
Yeah.
Didn't they have to limit UTM? I'm starting to remember this. Wasn't there a couple things that they had to change?
So the UTM in the original AltStore used JIT, like just-in-time compilation, and that's for technical reasons not possible in the AltStore PAL version, or in the App Store. App Store and AltStore PAL can't use JIT.
So they're the same on both.
Yeah, so it's just a slower UTM. But the reason I brought this up is they called me, and I was just like, one of my most pissed. I was like, they can't do this. I was like, I don't care if they approve an app for AltStore and then change the App Store rules. That's competition. That's how it works. It's the
holding it up part.
It is the fact that we weren't allowed to have it in the first place, and so I was pissed off. And so that's when I was like, Shane, okay, no, we're talking to Epic now. Like, I'm tired of trying to work with Apple. Like, they are just taking advantage of us. They because we had been so good. And back to the Brussels thing. We emailed them the question that we were going to ask them ahead of time. We were like, hey, we're going to call you out.
Yeah, you're not trying to do gotcha.
Like we were like, hey, we're working with you. We want to have a productive way. And so this is when I was first like, okay, Apple's not working with us. Let's talk to Epic. And then we talked to Epic, and they really were from the standpoint of, hey, we really just need people to be on alternative app stores. And to do that, this needs to be normalized. And so they just
that is their entire goal. Yeah, strategically.
Truly was. And they were like, so we want Fortnite. Would you be interested in having Fortnite on your store? And we're like, I think it'd be open.
Very much so.
Yeah, we come over to that. That's perfect. And then they were like, and would it help if you didn't have to have that $1.50 subscription? Oh, I should say at the time.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about that.
Because Apple charges us 50 cents for every download of AltStore PAL for a reason called the core technology fee. And we couldn't afford that because we're just based off donations. And so we had to pass that on to consumers. So we charged €1.50 to cover also for Delta, the 50-cent fee and tax and everything.
Yeah.
And so we charged that. But Epic then said, would you get more downloads if it was free? And we were just like, probably. Yeah, I think so. And so they then were like, sure, then we'll cover your CTF. We just want you to be able to exist like as easily as possible. And I do believe that. They do truly believe
Yeah,
that
exactly. Like
there should just be
just
more
like
stores.
Apple,
Yeah.
you're dealing with a company that has strategic goals,
Yeah.
and it's like they are highly incentivized to make it normalized to download third-party app stores and make it a thing that people are used to using. And so any way they can reduce that friction helps them long term.
Exactly. And so now they're just like, cool, we want to put your apps or our apps in your store. And they didn't care about us putting our apps in their store. So we're like, sounds good to us. We will take your
That's
money.
crazy. So what was that like when that happened? Was there a big impact on AltStore downloads, or did that change anything?
For sure. The fact of it being free was just the biggest thing by far.
Yeah.
And which, I mean, I understand. It was always dumb that you had to pay for AltStore, even though it was like only €1.50. I know that's like a frustration. Like I totally get it. And so
Wasn't that, you talked about the question that you emailed Apple ahead of time. Wasn't that the question you asked? Was basically like, hey, I was a student. I want to put this stuff out there for free.
Yep.
You're creating a mechanism that makes it where it would cost me millions of dollars if this becomes popular. What's the mechanism? And if I remember correctly, their response was very like, that's a good point. Like, we really want to work with you on that.
It's almost
But I'm
like because I
guessing-
didn't call them out on it. No, exactly. It's back to the productive like that's how I thought this would work better. I thought if me and us and Apple are working together, this is better for both of us. Apple does not feel that way, and it's
And like to counter what I said earlier about the being cordial, it's like that's an example where you giving them that question ahead of time probably meant they could prepare a question that sounded really good.
and
Which
for
they
both
did,
of us.
because I remember the reaction being pretty positive to like, oh wow, Apple actually like responded not callously like we were used to, but it's probably because they were prepared for it.
Yeah, but it's like we wanted to have a win for both of us. That's what that was our dream. It was like, hey, we can both win. It's not a zero-sum game here, Apple. Like, we just want to be the tiny little store on the side with the apps that you don't want. Like, the apps that you are literally rejecting, we will take. We're not trying to steal it, but yeah. And so we're working together, and it seemed to be fine, but yes. And that slowly fell apart. So then we started working with Epic more, and post working with Epic, we have not been working with Apple near this closely. And for just a mix of reasons, I think they hate it. And we're also just like, again, we were just like, so really, we learned they were taking advantage of us. So we stopped trying to reach out to them.
Yeah. I mean, it's like any business relationship is built on trust, and they burned it.
The sad thing, they burned it. And Epic, we went in thinking like distrusting. And then they, to their credit, whatever thing, they have backed up everything they said. They have not tried to like screw us over. And it's hard.
Right.
So I'm like, I wanted to be aligned with Apple. I didn't want to be aligned with Epic. This is not what I was trying to do. But it's like, this is the reality. Is Apple is not wanting to play along and whatever.
I guess the last thing then to kind of touch on is the last flare up I alluded to recently that happened yesterday. So these episodes, I don't release this like right after they come out. So this will all be old news, and I'm sure there'll be 5 more layers to the story by the time it comes out. But, and also this is a very like family friendly show. So just so you know, we're going to be talking about an adult oriented app. So I'll have chapter markers around it. Feel free to skip it. I mean, we're not going to be cussing or talking anything really explicit, but just so you know, that's happening. So correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of the story is, a new app has been launched on AltStore PAL, which is called Bathtub.
Hot Tub.
And it's basically like a porn app, right? Which famously is not allowed on the App Store at all, unless it's not the primary part of your app. As many people have pointed out over the last 24 hours, Reddit is basically a porn app that also has a bunch of other stuff on top of it that's bigger, so Apple lets them through. And then, of course, like Safari itself can get access to adult content just super easily. So it's kind of a bit of a like silly thing, but you know, it is part of the App Store. And I do think as a parent, it's like, I get it. They want the App Store to be of a certain level of trustworthiness. Doesn't stop them from putting casino apps for children in there, but...
And I get it too. I agree. Yeah.
And having a third-party App Store is a good opportunity for these things to exist in a separated way or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of the foundation. Is this came out, and then Apple, as you'd expect, freaked out about it. But the thing that I'm guessing you didn't expect is the way they freaked out about it was they super honed in on the fact that your press release was using the words, Apple has approved this app. It's the first app that they've approved. And I'm putting words in your mouth, so correct me. But my guess is that when you say approved, you mean unlike UTM or these other stories that we just talked about, where they were denying the notarization process. They approved the notarization, which means we actually could let it through.
Yes, that is
but
exactly.
Apple was like, they're making it sound like we approved this, and we did not, because we want to protect your children. Is that a correct? That's
pretty good just summary of the whole thing. And you're right that we did not expect that strong a response, because so to back up, we knew by saying Apple approved that it was Apple's not gonna like that. But the reason we did this, it's kind of like the same thing. Back in November, Apple rejected Mini VMac, a Mac emulator, from our store again.
Yeah.
And once again, I was pretty pissed off. I was like, Apple, you cannot do this. This one is just illegal. Like, I'm sorry. And so we've been talking to the EC about this, but I was like, if Apple wants to be abusing the notarization process like this, we need to use it against them. Like, if they want to be inserting themselves in it, they got to put their name on these things.
I see.
Because people don't realize that they are involved in this. They're getting away with making these decisions and with no scrutiny. And so
it's a have your cake and eat it too. It's like, all right, if you're going to use notarization to say we are allowing this or we're not allowing this based on our own decisions, we're going to highlight the fact that, all right, well, then that meant that you were okay with this one according to your
own thing.
Or whatever.
And so that was the motivation. It was we were protesting them abusing notarization, and I thought it was funny because it was true. I was like, it is approved. I think it's a pretty funny statement. I know Apple's gonna hate it, but I don't care.
That's a pretty good PR sleight of hand.
I was happy with it. I thought so, and most people liked it. We did learn that I did not expect. Some people just thought we were lying and just thought we made up that Apple approved it. And that was basically probably the miscalculation on us. Was we're so in the weeds on this, we kind of forgot that people may actually think that we're just lying about, making up lies about this.
Right. That it's just a complete and then PR trying to get attention move.
Exactly. So that was an interesting thing that we had to figure out. But no, it was, my favorite thing is we sent this out to maybe a few, The Verge and TechCrunch ahead of time saying that we're going to launch this. And then Apple sent out their response to everyone.
Yeah.
The stupidest thing. We got so many press emails within the next hour after Apple sent out that blast, because everyone was just like, what happened?
What's going on?
What is Apple talking about? And so they reached out and we're like, why? We're shocked. Why would
So when
Apple
you do
this?
something like that, did you sort of have a playbook? Were you prepared for, all right, they're going to get mad. Here's our sort of standard statement, or was your statement your original statement and that's basically it?
It was our original statement. So just our announcement tweet, we thought that was going to be it. And then we saw that Apple was doing this counterplay, and we didn't really care at first. And I still think it's great. But then there was some people who took Apple at face value and again thought we lied, because Apple's statement said we made a false statement. And that I was very we did not lie. We absolutely did not make a false statement.
Well, anecdotally, my perspective on this, I think I saw your Mastodon post about it, but it was a link to 9 to 5 Mac. And when I opened it, and then I experienced this across multiple news articles afterwards, they clearly had only gotten Apple's press release initially.
Yep.
So almost everybody's article, which it sounds like probably except for TechCrunch and The Verge, almost everybody's article was literally their statement. And so I was super confused because they all were saying things like, AltStore is claiming that Apple approved this, but they didn't. But nobody had AltStore's quote, at least not in the original articles. So it's easy to see when you're reading it as just a reader, or even as those press junkets, seeing it and being like, yeah, they claimed that we approved it in the App Store, but we didn't.
Yeah.
And assuming that's what was claimed, even though obviously it wasn't.
And so that was, then we had to put out our first ever like official statement. Because I was like, we just need to get ahead of this, like, because it's like, it's what we're doing is fine. I stand by the fact that we have porn on AltStore. It's hidden, like you got to add the source, but it's something that should exist. So that was also part of
we should
this.
highlight that too. It's not like you download App Store and there's a porn app in your face. It's possible.
It is possible because how AltStore works is you add sources, and only once you add a source will you see all the apps from that source. So if you just download AltStore, you will have no idea there's Hot Tub at all in it, and so that's how our distinction we try to make. But yeah, another thing is we just wanted to own the fact because we knew that like porn is always no one talks about it and it's so popular. And I just was like, I just didn't want it. It's a huge thing, and I'm not against porn. And so I thought it would be important for us just to stand behind it, just to own. Like the same thing with Apple. Like if we're gonna put it on our store, I'm gonna back it. I'm gonna put our name on it.
Once you make that decision.
Yeah. And so that was like a whole thing. But again, yeah. So we want to do a whole press thing, and then Apple sent out their thing. So then we sent out our official statement, which me and Shane just like sat here like for hours yesterday, like writing, like, oh,
you had it was like an image, right? With the text inside. Yeah. It looked like, official press secretary.
Exactly. It's like so funny. It's a keynote slide. We put our icon in the corner, put the font. Like, yeah, it looks official.
So nice.
But it's kind of, we learned like controversy makes us popular, or just like, yeah, it blew up. AltStore downloads are higher. Hot Tub's like the number 2 app.
Oh yeah, this is the Streisand effect to the nth degree,
it's
right?
Like seeing it.
How many people would have any idea about this if it wasn't for this becoming a massive story?
Yeah, like AltStore. I checked like Google Trends. It's like at its peak, searching AltStore for ever since Hot Tub came out, and that's include like the entire lifetime. I'm like, Apple really just like made it so much bigger than it was. And then people
it's a weird strategic play from their perspective, right? Because on one hand, it normalizes it for way more people to download an alternate store, which is not what they want.
Yeah.
But the flip side is they have some assumption of what kind of leverage this gives them politically, right? And like, I don't understand the European world at all. In the States, well, to be honest, I don't understand it in the States either. But like, it's certainly a divisive topic that you could imagine them utilizing, but it's very ephemeral, at least to me, my understanding of how the impact is. Yeah. But certainly in the short term, it has to have just been massive for just people understanding that it was possible to download third-party stores.
That and the fact that we said it was Apple approved made a lot of conversations that people are learning that Apple's involved in this process, because people just didn't know, and now it's front and center. And so people are having that discussion. I'm like, this is good. We need people to know that Apple approves and rejects apps from our store. Like, this needs to be prompt. So it had the effect we did want in the end. But yes, I just miscalculated how upset Apple would be by that statement. And I was like, okay. Sorry, we're trying to be that antagonistic. I was just mad you blocked Mini VMac. I was just getting back to you for
exactly.
that.
Yeah, this is really about Windows simulation.
Yeah, if y'all hadn't rejected it, we wouldn't have done this. And so it's like, I don't know. It's kind of your fault.
Yeah, man. Just such an insane story. And hopefully people are getting across what I've felt every time we've talked, which is like, you're just a guy who likes technology and likes games and wants people to be able to play them on their phones. And you and a very talented developer and strategically smart, but also kind person. A weird alchemy of things going on here.
I appreciate that.
And like, I don't know anybody else who's gone through any sort of journey remotely like this. And so huge shout out to Shane for going through this with you, because who would you reach out to understand what you're going through? There'd be 0 people, right? Like, I can't think of literally anybody.
Exactly. Like, we are the 2 people, in the world that like are understanding this very weird, like, mix of so many things going on right now.
Yeah. Global politics and technical weird, nuance. It's a weird combination of a lot of things.
Yeah, like I saw a Business Insider news article about like Hot Tub, and it was like how Apple, a porn app, and Trump's tariffs are all connected. I'm like, oh man, now we're like in like U.S. we're getting involved in this.
I will say there. You want to be loud, but there might be one area where you don't want to get attention.
Exactly. No, yes, very much so.
Oh man, that's crazy. Well, it's funny. Like when I finally was like, I'm going to get the show back going, and I was like, I have to start with Riley, like because I wanted to have you on for forever. I thought, man, this is perfect timing because everything's really settled down into something, right?
Yeah.
I thought the next shoe to drop was going to be who knows what's going on with the DOJ thing in the U.S.
Yeah.
But they're certainly the EU has created a potential playbook for everybody else.
Yes.
And I guess you're along for the ride for all of those.
Yep, we're just here to see, like, exactly what you said. Like, our goal is just to make all these apps just available, like Delta, and well, now those are in the App Store, but like, there's just so many more apps out there that haven't been able to exist. So yeah, it's just we want to get those to be out there, and it's gonna take time, but it's gonna come to America eventually. We've been talking to the DOJ. They know us.
Oh, wow.
It very surreal talking to them because like we had like a Zoom call with them and they knew everything about us. And I was like, wow, you know,
that's
they were like,
disturbing.
they just were telling me my GBA Firewatch history.
They're like, oh, you changed your paint on your wall.
No, yes. I was like, wow, y'all did your research. It's really cool. Like, y'all actually do know what you're talking about here, but it's fun.
I have gathered that, like, I think most people's impression of politicians or bureaucrats is like government, they don't understand how anything works, which, like, obviously there's truth to that. And usually the mouthpieces, like the elected official, they aren't experts on it. But the people I know in U.S. Senate and stuff like that are at the wonky policy level, it's always surprising, like, how deep they go on these topics. And I don't know if that was your experience with the EU as well, but like,
no, yeah, the EU didn't. Yeah,
it's always surprising to me, or it's a little what's the right word? It makes me feel a little better about the world, realizing like there are nerds embedded through all of this stuff who do actually understand things better than I assume that they do.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, it'll be fun to watch you. This sounds dark. It'll be fun to watch you go through all of this, but like navigate all of this is the right word. Hopefully, it's less stressful than it was at the beginning.
It's less stressful, but we've learned to just play everything like as it comes. We're just like, we have plans, but we know things come up, and so most of it is just how can we respond to whatever situation arises, which is fun. Like it keeps things interesting for sure. But yeah, so it's
and
like
Patreon, big shout out to them for basically creating the mechanism for you to, like, ultimately the leverage that all these big players, Apple, Epic, if they ever decide to expose or utilize it, all the leverage that they have is like financial instruments, essentially, other than legal stuff. And like, you're sort of outside of that to a degree because you have a group of supporters. You're very small. You aren't trying to build a multi-billion-dollar business with VC funding or anything. And that makes you agile in a way that's probably very annoying for these big companies that are used to being able to apply levers differently.
Yes, it is very annoying for Apple. I know that for a fact because I know that because we can just respond much faster than they can, and they'll take a long time to make decisions. And so that is our advantage for at least them. But in general, we can be skunk work and do weird things or stuff a big company can't do. And I think that's so important to who we are. It's one of the reasons we're not getting like VC funding or trying to blow up. Because I think that would ruin what AltStore and Delta is, which is we are indie driven by us having our Patreon. It means we're motivated to like make sure our Patreon's good and make sure that we're treating our patrons well. So
that's awesome. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and try to actually land this plane then. Thank you for the extra time that you've given me from our scheduled time.
Oh, it's been great. Yeah.
So I want to end it the way that I always end the show, which is to ask you, what is a person or people out there that have inspired you that you'd recommend others check out?
Gotcha. And good question. So I have two, if that's fine. It's like for reasons. The first one, probably most people who listen to this show will know, the Tapbots crew. Like them from the very beginning of when I was starting to make apps, I loved Tweetbot, and I was very inspired by the fact that they were at the time a 2-person company, just a developer and designer doing everything. And to me, that was like the biggest iPhone app. Like everyone in the Apple community like talked about it, and I was like, wow, if 2 people can just like work on an app and make a business together, that's kind of the dream. And so that was directly from them was a lot of inspiration for just like doing me and Shane, just us two, being independent and seeing what we can do with it. And so
I just saw, I think yesterday, they were giving some hints that maybe they're considering a Blue Sky client, which please,
I know. Exactly.
I really love that.
I mean, I do love Mastodon for so much, but the main reason on Mastodon is because it has Ivory. Like that's like I do love Mastodon the values, but man, Ivory. It's like I'm such an app snob. I need the apps that work, and that's the reason I'm not on Blue Sky. I mean, I am on Blue Sky, but I don't use it as much. Is because it's a native Blue Sky app, and it's not my favorite app. And it's just, I mean, like I'll check it, but like Ivory's just nice, and even Threads, at least as an app, I do appreciate like the finesse in it, but whatever.
Versus the React Native app of Blue Sky, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Tapbots crew, I just am so inspired by them. I think they make great apps, and I've always wanted to someday be successful as a 2-person company. So I've achieved that goal, and so kind of owe that to them. And then the other is a very different, but it's this indie creator, Supper Mario Broth. It's like it's
Broth?
a blog that's focused on Mario content, and they like do deep dives into very nerdy things about like Nintendo games. Like they'll be like, hey, in Mario Galaxy they have 3 different sprites they use for reflections, and you don't see all of them in the game, but here they are. Man. Or they'll be like, here's a hidden room you can access that's not intended to be accessed, but like the super nerdy nitty gritty stuff from like all Nintendo games. I love that. But why I say they inspired is that was the first Patreon I ever donated to. I followed them on Twitter. I loved them back when Twitter was good. And I loved them so much. And I was like, I want to support them. I just love this content. And I donated like $3 a month to them. And just like without really thinking about it. And it was the fact that I did that when Shane was talking about Patreon, I was like, oh yeah, I'm supporting like Supper Mario Broth just because they make such amazing content for fun. Like I just wanted to support them, and so I was like, you know what? Maybe I could do that too. Like I could just get like people who love my content and support me, and so really, yeah.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
It was awesome, and I love their content. It's incredible. Like they do really detailed like dives into all this stuff, and I don't know. The nerd in me loves it so much, and I love that they spend so much time on it. And yeah, it's like just a passion project.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing people appreciate about the indie world generally too, is just this idea of like it being doing stuff not because it makes sense, but because you're excited about it.
Yep.
That seeing people be excited about a thing, even if you don't care about it on your own, is in itself super exciting. And so yeah, that's cool. And Patreon is such a good mechanism for that kind of stuff.
It's incredible. Like that's what I like. Just shout out in general to Patreon, because yeah, like you said, I would not be here without it today. It is our entire source of income, and so many creators. It like allows for so much creativity in the world and art, and yeah, it's amazing. And now Apple's trying to take 30% of all of it because, of course, like, and just like read the room.
More fun Apple things.
Just like ridiculous, but.
Yeah, that was a weird. Yeah, I could go into long detail about
like a whole
the weird choices there, where they tried to force them to switch over, but or I guess they did force them to switch over. Yeah,
it's happening. I'm like, wow, I can't believe it. Apple's God, it's so bad. Too much of a tangent, but ridiculous.
Yeah, but and like to bring it back to sort of your original thing though, because like we both have said many things about our feelings on Apple policies over the last few years, but ultimately it's like the engineers there and the designers there and the people building things there are still building things that we get really excited about. Otherwise we wouldn't care in the first place.
Yep.
And it's the dichotomy of the people building things for passion mixed with them doing things that tick us off.
Yeah.
On the policy level and everything, that I think makes people feel as strong as they do. Otherwise you would have just released this on Android and went about your day, right?
But to me, like, well, I like iPhones. I like all this. Like, it's and I mean, it's also a little more fun to try to figure all this out on
that's
like,
true.
It would have been too
easy
on Android, but it's like, you know what? I had to be creative and figure something out.
That's funny. All right. Well, I guess to wrap this up, where can people find you and all of your work?
Well, you can find me across all the social medias nowadays. I'm at Riley Testut on Mastodon, at rileytestut at mastodon.social and at rileytestut on Threads, or riley.social on Blue Sky because of that fancy domain.
Oh, yes, the
stuff.
domain.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, I do love that.
Yeah, and for me too, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to continue using the ending or if I'm just going to end it with me talking. So I'm just going to talk and then we'll see if I cut this out or not.
Excellent.
But right now, Launched is on, launchedfm.com is where you'll find everything. That's the easy one. That is also the Blue Sky handle because of the fancy domain thing. And then pretty much everywhere else, it's Launched FM, I think. It might be just Launched on Mastodon. But you can find all of that on the website, and that's the best way to let me know. If you're excited to have the show back, let me know on any of the social media platforms so that I feel really good about myself, because that's what this is all about. Riley, thank you so much for easing me back into this with such a fun conversation. I had a blast.
Thanks. I'm honored to be the first one that you had back.